I wanted to talk a bit today about why audiophiles and probably humans in general feel the need to argue so much. If you've been around any audio forums here on the comment section in YouTube, you'll know that there are regular arguments between people, and it's particularly true in the world of digital audio. And I want to talk a bit about why that is, or why I think it is. And the reason I want to talk about that is twofold. One of them is to hopefully help us all understand ourselves better. The other reason is to hopefully reduce the number of arguments, because once you understand a bit about this, you can accept the cause of it for what it is and not feel the need to have the argument. And so the biggest cause, I believe, of these arguments is that most people are very uncomfortable with uncertainty. And the moment uncertainty is presented to them, the moment a different, not even truth, because sometimes these things, we don't know what's true because we don't know all the ins and outs. We don't know everything there is to know. But the moment a different possibility is presented to somebody than what they are comfortable as knowing and believing and experiencing, some people get really uncomfortable with that. And I'd go so far as to say that most of us get really uncomfortable with that. And the challenge is to hopefully not feel the need to defend your position and become more and more rigid in that position in order to become right. And in order to squash down that sense of uncertainty, what is a far more healthy way to deal with it, and this is in every sense, not just to do with audio, the more healthy way to deal with it is to recognize the fact that you are uncomfortable, to recognize the fact that, hey, this is actually pressing my buttons because it's different to what I thought. And the moment you're able to lean into that discomfort, and the moment you're able to explore it and ask some questions, the uncertainty becomes less of a threat to us, which is why we tend to argue and push back against it. And instead of becoming a threat to us, it actually becomes an opportunity to explore, to learn, and to hopefully have some fun along the way. And if we talk about this in specifics of audio, when you have a think about the areas that people become particularly animated around audio, it's things like brand X is better than brand Y, although that's less common in audio. It's more something that you tend to have happen in, say, camera circles. It's huge in the camera world. But in the case of audio, it can be brand related, and people wanting to generalize that brand X is this and brand Y is that, when my experience of most brands is that each brand has a variety and a range of performance, types of products, sound signatures even. It's very rare that one brand is just one way. And then another thing that I notice comes up a lot is when it comes to things like, as I mentioned earlier, digital audio. And I think, or anything actually to go beyond digital audio, anything that revolves around measurements and data. I think data is both wonderful and dangerous all at the same time, because data presents to us a sense of certainty. We think that because there's numbers and because there's measurements, we know all there is to know about that particular thing. But unfortunately, there are two factors at play. One of them is that if you're anything like me, and most audiophiles are more like me than not, we don't know enough to know all the ins and outs that are going on behind those numbers. And therefore, the number is a massively simplified version of what's actually going on. It's like saying that there's 101 different ways you can arrive at a particular number. And so just looking at that number doesn't tell us how that number was achieved. It doesn't tell us, if we use SINAD as an example, SINAD can be representative, I should say, of many different combinations of noise and distortion. Obviously, lower SINAD always means less noise and less distortion, but what was the makeup of that noise and distortion is a whole different question and a whole different story. And I'm not saying that just to pick on SINAD, that's just one example that was obvious and top of mind. The point is, when we get data, whether it's distortion, whether it's noise, whether it's frequency response, whatever it is, that data is one point in a whole world of other things that are going on. And the more I look into audio, the more I understand that there's a whole lot of stuff that we don't even know how to measure. We don't even know how to quantify. Maybe we can measure all the individual pieces, but we don't actually know what it means when you put all those pieces together. We don't know what that qualitatively means from a listening point of view. And so the challenge is that we get faced with data, we get faced with the perception of certainty, And we oversimplify from there. We overgeneralize and say, oh, if this data says this, then here is the truth. And then when someone else comes along and says, but I'm hearing it differently, it can make us feel like suddenly that certainty that we thought we had is being questioned, is being challenged. And some people's reaction to that is to argue, is to become more rigid, more closed-minded, to hold their position and force the other person to admit that they're wrong so that the uncertainty goes away. I think the idea of oversimplification is another thing that I want to touch on even further here. It comes up a lot in digital audio. I've been noticing, I did a review recently, I can't even think what I was talking about, but I think it was on one of the DAC reviews I did, and somebody was talking about the essentially the fact that, you know, bits are bits, and if the data arrives, then the data arrives. And my problem with that conversation, actually no, it was to do with cables. And my problem with that conversation is that, yes, it is true that if the data arrives, or it doesn't. The problem is not that. It's the oversimplification of the fact that the data might be intact, but if there's noise arriving along with it, and that noise is able to get from whatever connection it is on the DAC through to the analog stage where the sound's coming out, the analog signal's coming out and going onto your amplifier, or if it's getting into the clock stage of the DAC and messing up the timing and the accuracy of the timing of the DAC, those things are all going to influence the end result. The more time I spend looking at this stuff, the more I come to the understanding that I don't know all of this going on inside DACs. And I honestly don't believe that anybody has all of the answers. There are some amazing DAC designers I've spoken to who have a lot of the answers, but I'm yet to talk to anybody where I feel like they've got everything down pat. And the point there is that the people who are complaining that bits are bits, and if the bits arrive, that's all that matters, they're oversimplifying the whole situation. They're oversimplifying the fact that the noise that comes along with those bits is an issue, and where that noise goes in the DAC is an issue. How the DAC handles timing errors is an issue. And so it's not to say that everybody should just believe everything they hear. They definitely shouldn't, and skepticism's great, and we're always finding and learning new things. The point of me saying that is that this is those times when the people who are feeling the need to argue that bits are bits are clinging onto a sense of certainty. They're clinging onto the idea that if I just understand that, and if that's the truth, I never have to think about anything else. I don't have to think about buying a new system. I don't have to consider the fact that cables might make a difference. I don't have to consider the fact that what I'm hearing being different to what somebody else is hearing is actually that everything is different and everything is vague and uncertain and changeable, and there's lots of grey areas in audio. They want it to be a simple black and white of, this is the best measuring product, therefore this is the best thing to buy. Or this is what Joe Blogg's told me to get, and therefore this has to be the right choice because I spent my money on it. There's lots of different reasons we can feel the need to justify our purchases or to justify our positions. It hasn't even got to be about purchase justification. I guess the takeaway from all this is, next time you're in a conversation, whether it's about audio or anything in life, if you're feeling the need to get rigid, to hold your position, to try to convince the other person that they're wrong, instead try to have a think about whether or not you are currently feeling uncomfortable with something that is uncertain. Is there a grey area that's been raised? Is there something that's challenging a position that you thought was a confirmed, well understood reality or truth? And maybe start questioning whether or not that needs to be held so tightly. Sometimes maybe it does. Sometimes maybe it doesn't. It was interesting. There's actually a great video I've just started watching today by Adam Savage from Mythbusters. And he's talking about one of the Mythbusters myth that they never actually tackled, and it was dowsing. It's the idea of detecting underground water using a forked stick. And he talks about why they never tackled that one. And I love the fact that whilst he's pretty clear on this, on the fact that there is no scientific evidence that it works, what he also is open to is the fact that there might be things we don't understand about it. I won't try to explain why he didn't do it. I'll let you watch the video for yourself. If I remember to, I'll link it below. If I don't, just search Adam Savage and the Mythbusters myth that they never addressed, or they never busted. But the key thing, the thing that really stood out to me, was that here is a scientist who's done lots of myth busting, who instead of looking at something and going, oh, there's no scientific data. In fact, if anything, there's scientific data that goes against this thing, therefore it's rubbish. Instead, what he said is the science would suggest that this thing doesn't work. And yet here are a bunch of different possibilities as to why maybe that specific thing doesn't work, but there is another way in which they're resulting, or they're arriving at the result they do. In other words, maybe somebody who does water dowsing for a living is able to find the water, but not through the means they think. Maybe the forked stick has nothing to do with it. Maybe it's actually about something else. It could be an innate or an inherent sense that humans have to detect something that we don't actually otherwise understand yet, that we've never measured, we've never experimented with. So the point being, he's trying to find, or he's open to the fact, he's not even trying to find, he's just open to the fact that there are other possibilities. And that's really what this comes down to. There are always other possibilities. There are always things we don't understand. There are always things that we can learn if we can identify those times that we're uncomfortable. And instead of fighting for our position, start exploring your position, start asking questions. It doesn't mean you have to give up your position. It doesn't even mean you have to be, admit that you were wrong or anything like that. You might take a half step from where you are now to a slightly nuanced different position on that same topic. But the point is, you've been open to explore it, open to discuss it, and open to learn. So that's the conversation I wanted to have today. It's been bubbling around in my head. I thought I'd share it with you. Hopefully it's been interesting.